Welcome to GameAbstract Lesson 3. In this video, we're going to develop a loop to handle our game and also explore some essential game functions from the game object. So let's get to it. So in the previous video, we had discussed how to declare resources, and that this is a JSON, an array of JSONs. We created a preload function to kind of handle what needs to happen before the game starts. And one of those primary things is that we have to actually create a game variable that's a game object. As part of that game object, we can preload the resources. And then from there, we do a document onload so that it actually executes this preload function when the web page is done loading. So now the question is, how do we get the game to actually run? Because this is just simply preloading our resources. So for that, we have to create a function. So we're going to kind of do this a little bit different in that before we create the function, let's just assume we had a function. So once we preloaded all the resources, it'd be nice for us to actually start our game loop. All right, so that's what we want. Well, that's what we have to create. So let's create a game loop. Now, this is a little bit different than some other loops that you're familiar with in terms of like a for loop or a while loop. This is going to end up being something called a recursive loop. Okay. What it means to be recursive is that the function will call itself. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. So JavaScript has a function called setTimeout, which will call a function after a certain amount of time. You can see here timeout. So let's do it like this. This is not complete, but so the idea is that setTimeout is going to call a function after 10 milliseconds. So what function do we want to call? Let's call the game loop. So think about it. So from onload, we call preload. Preload then calls the game loop. The game loop does some code, and then the setTimeout will call the game loop again after 10 milliseconds. We do some more code, and another 10 milliseconds pass, and we kind of keep going on and on. So this actually ends up being an infinite loop. There is a way to stop it, but for our purposes, we don't have to. Okay? And just to kind of prove to you that this is a loop, let's go ahead and do a console.log of simply the word loop. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see here it's looping. And if you can see my little scroll bar is getting smaller and smaller. So I'm going to take this out. We don't need to do it. Hopefully that proved to you this is a loop. It is going. And let's run it again just to kind of clear it out. Clear out that. Okay, so this is a game loop. Now we got to discuss some essential game processes that need to happen that come actually from the game object. So the first thing we always want to do in our game loop is to process our input. And processing input handles the keyboard, handles the mouse, will handle touch screens for your tablet and phone users. The last thing we want to do is to update the game, which handles things to do with time and anything else that might be included in the update function. So we process our inputs, we update the game. So what happens in the middle is the actual game. But before we get into it, we have to introduce an if statement. And I'll cover what this is all about. So if game.ready, notice game. This is all part of this game variable that we created over here. Game.ready is false until actually all the resources are loaded. So the way JavaScript works is that when it starts to load some resources, it does it in an asynchronous fashion, meaning that it's going to try to load stuff, but then continue on with the program. So it doesn't make any sense for us to actually do anything with the game until we actually load all the resources. And that's what game.ready is all about. So once all the resources are loaded, then game.ready will become true. Once game.ready becomes true, then we can execute whatever state the game is in. And the way we do that is like this. So game.state represents what the game should be doing. Now, in the next video, we're going to explore more of this game.state. The focus of this particular video was simply to cover how to do a game loop and some of these essential processes from the game object, which is process input, update, and then game.state, as well as game.ready. So let's go back up to our presentation. Okay, so it was a short video, but an essential one. It showed you how to create a game loop and those primary functions that need to happen in order to make your game work. Okay, goodbye.